Hello and welcome to what is part 3, but also part 1 at the same time, of the Long Patrol on the Royal Navy support for the Army in the Western Front. Basically looking at the monitor. This is going to be a long-running series, mainly because there is honestly not a lot of information out there. Most of it is conflicting. For example, during this two-parter, in the second part of about Lord Clive class, part 4 of the Long Patrol overall, I'll be talking about the first Ostend raid. It takes place in 1918, according to the history books and Wikipedia. Yet, in the same part, I'll be talking about operations that took place in 1915, or was bombarded, and all sorts of things. Very similar to, actually, the raid in 1918. So, hey, this is the joy of history. There is often a fair number of interpretations going around. Anyway, without much further ado. So this is Lord Clive class. Now, anyone who actually knows this class will go, hang on. They're not M5 to M8. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You know, there are 8 of these vessels. Well, that's because, again, it's divided up into 2. So I'm going to be looking at 5 to 8 in this part, and then 9 to 12 in the next part. Rather fun, and they're rather cool ships. They are very, very cool ships. So the Lord Clive stars. Let's start off with their particulars. They are not that dissimilar to their predecessors, and there's a reason for that. They're based off the same hull type as the Abercrombie class. But they have 12-inch guns. Yes. Lord Clive class displays 6,150 tons. They have a length of 335 feet, 102 meters. They have a beam of 87 feet, 27 feet, or 27 meters. They have a draft of 9 foot 7 inches, or 2.92 meters. And their propulsion is 2 power boilers, powering 2 triple expansion steam engines for 2,310 indicated horsepower, deployed via 2 shafts for a top speed of 6.5 knots. They sound fairly similar now, don't they? Complement 194 armament. Originally, 2 BL 12-inch Mark 8 guns in a single twin turret. 2 12-pounder, that's 3-inch guns, 76 millimeters, and 2 quick-firing 3-pounders, with 1 2-pounder, or 40 millimeter, AA gun added on as well for good measure. Later on, 2 6-inch guns, 200 rounds each, were added after the funnel for destroyer defense, because it was found the 12-pounders were just not enough. They didn't provide enough range or enough stopping power. Later still, Lord Clive, General Wolfe, and it was planned for Prince Eugene, would get a single BL 18-inch Mark 1, 1918. Armor, they had a belt of 6 inches, turret 10.5 inches, barbette of 8 inches, and a deck of 2 inches. Fun times. History. The Abercrombies were all to go to the Mediterranean, and yet the war on the Western Front dragged on. And the British Army was immersing with heavy artillery in fields of mud, which is certainly not fun. So the RN said, well, we have these pre-dreadnoughts we're sort of considering getting rid of anyway. We now have a monitor hull on file that's supposed to read, not on fire. I'm sure I edited that. The guns are slightly smaller, but that means we can fit more smaller guns to deal with destroyers. And so for the Majestic class, pre-dreadnoughts, Hannibal, Magnificent, Victorious, and Mars, were laid up in early 1915 and had their 12-inch guns removed. His sister, Illustrious, disarmed, with 2 of her guns going to form the Tyne turrets. However, just because they have their guns removed does not mean they're out of the war. Remember, this is the Royal Navy. They have been doing en flute for a long, long time. Hannibal, Magnificent Mars, are subsequently used as troop ships during operations off the Dardanelles. And in late 1915, after the conclusion of the Dardanelles campaign, Hannibal is stationed in Egypt as a depot ship. Magnificent and Mars returned to Britain to be used as ammunition ship and a depot ship, respectively. And while 6 of the Lord Clives served in Dover Patrol, actually Earl of Peterborough and Sir Thomas Picton joined their erstwhile providers of guns in the Mediterranean theatre. And please let's consider this. You have, at the beginning of a world war, a massive war. A war which is theoretically, if the destruction of the Grand Fleet takes place, Britain would lose. Where pretty much every semi-viable ship, seemingly, should be being retained in service in full capability. And yet, HMS Majestic herself is damaged and sunk early in the war, and 5 of the remaining 8 of the class, there'd been 9 originally, are laid up and are turned into gunless vessels. Pretty confident Navy. This again speaks to the whole problem in World War I when we start comparing the Germans and the British. Because the Germans on paper look very impressive, but they don't have much depth to their force. The British have a lot of depth, and this gives them a massive advantage when it comes to the longer war. One they use shamelessly. And these are the donor ships. The Majestic class. Aren't they pretty? They are pretty. The Majestic's class battleships are, well, originally they were a sort of continuation of the Naval Defence Act of 1889, but then Lord Spencer gets involved, Lord Spencer, and the Spencer program basically happens in that this class is massively expanded in numbers. John Spencer, who was first Sea Lord in 1893, originally orders 2 of the Majestic class, and then a third, which is Renown, is produced as a sort of second-rate cruiser leader version, and these are first-rate battleships. But then they go, we've not got enough. We're ordering 7 more. And so they end up with 9. And the ship actually pictured is none other than HMS Mars. Her guns get taken off, and as you can see, not much is changed until they get added on to Lord Clive above. So that is HMS Mars. There is a look of her, for those of you who are wondering, there is a slight look of the Thunder Child on around her. There is. You can't say there isn't with those side-mounted double stacks. So they become, and they are really quite good battleships for their time. Okay, yes, they're pre-dreadnought, but that doesn't make them bad. They are 16,000 tons in displacement. They are 128 meters long, 23 meters wide in beam, 8.2 meters draft. They have 8 Scotch Marine boilers with 10,000 indicated horsepower. So, in the nicest way, they actually out-horsepowered by a long way. the Lord Clive class. Let's be honest, they have more than 4 times the indicated horsepower of the Lord Clives, despite being a lot older than them. They had a top speed of 16 knots, and they had 4 12-inch Mark 8 guns, 12 quick-firing 6-inch guns, 16 12-pounder guns, 12 3-pounder guns, 5 18-inch torpedo tubes, all sorts of armour. Are you starting to get an idea, by the way, where the rest of the armament of the Lord Clives came from? 6-inch guns, anyone? 12-pounder guns, anyone? 3-pounder guns, anyone? The Draw Navy was very, very good at making at recycling. Oh, upcycling, perhaps you'd call it, if you could consider adding a modern fire control system and turning into something, well, let's be honest, very different. The Majestic class was still around and still in use. Strange enough. And actually, I have another picture of them which I'll quickly display. Find the image. Up properly. This didn't. This has worked for once of the 3 times I practiced it. This is the Majestic outline from Brassey's, so you can get an idea of the ships. Now, that's a pretty decent ship for its age. That's a fairly strong armor belt. It's Harvey steel. Harvey steel. Not quite as strong as Krupp, but a lot stronger than its predecessors. An American manufacturer, basically, I think the story goes, he's one of the key people who found Bethlehem steel. A heart called Harvey comes up. And there are the names. Majestic, victorious, magnificent, Mars, Hannibal, illustrious, George, Caesar, and Jupiter. God, that's an inspiring set of names. And you can also see how the guns are mounted, how you have the 6-inchers, 12-pounders, and where you even have the 3-pounders. They're a good class. They really are. So, and because we have a nice picture of Lord Clive in her original form at the top there, I thought for our picture, and while we're discussing Lord Clive, this lovely painting of her firing her 18-inch gun would do rather nicely. And you'll please note she still did retain her 12-inch guns. So, don't think they ever fired a broadside. There have been talks. There are some papers which sort of talk one way, some which talk another way. But I don't think she ever did fire a broadside. Lord Clive had an interesting life. She was named after Major General Robert Clive, the first British governor of the Bengal Presidency, and only ship of her name to serve the Royal Navy, probably because of the political sensitivity of that name. She was laid down with the name M6 on 9th of January, not M5, M6 apparently. I must have missed an M somewhere in my calculations. At Harland de Wolf's berth number 3. Now, remember we talked about what's being built in berth number 2. Yes, in berth number 2, there are the Abercrombies being built. So in berth number 3, in the shipyard at Belfast, Northern Ireland, as yard number 478, and renamed Lord Clive on the 8th of March of that year. So she's laid down in 1915. She's launched on the 10th of June, completed by 10th of July at an estimated cost of £260,000. That's pretty useful. She finishes working up and is sent to the Thames Estuary on August 1915 to practice bombardment techniques with her sister ships Sir John Moore and Prince Rupert. Yes, 3 are ready that quickly. They laid out a replica of the principal features of the Belgian coast near Zeebrugge and that Thames Estuary, and the ships practiced their manoeuvring and spotting arrangements. One problem was that the modified 12-inch guns did break down a bit, and actually, Bacon will get into this in part 4 or part 2 of this sort of two-parter on this class, and we'll discuss it quite heavily. The reason the 12-inch guns broke down was they'd originally been designed to fire at quite low, quite straight angles, not up to 30 degrees, and the components were also quite elderly. The British had literally ripped the guns, most of the gun units, and honestly, most of the turrets straight out of the battleships, put them into these. However, a bombardment was planned for the 21st of August. It was postponed to the 22nd because of bad weather. And then Lord Clive assisted in supporting an armada of 10 destroyers, 9 minesweepers, and the seaplane carrier Riviera to provide for spotting, plus 4 ships to handle the observation tripods, and 50 drifters to handle the explosive anti-submarine nets that would be laid to protect the monitors, sailed to a position about 10 miles off Zeebrugge during the night of the 22nd to 23rd of August. Lord Clive anchored and opened fire at 05:36 hours on the locks of the Zeebrugge Canal that led to the German naval base at Bruges, Belgium. She fired 31 shells and at locks over an hour and a half before switching targets to a nearby factory, received 11 rounds. Reginald Bacon, in charge, the Vice Admiral in charge, ordered the ships to cease fire after 2 hours, cancelling plans to bombard Ostend as well, since both Sir John Moore and Prince Rupert had been suffering significant problems with their turrets. The bombardment was considered ineffectual. 2 barges were sunk, but locks were not hit. The British judged this, though, as a good first try, and planned to try it again once the ships had been repaired. She has more fun in 1916, where she was stationed in Thames Estuary as a propaganda exercise in order to shoot down approaching German Zeppelins with shrapnel shells fired by her main guns. But the Zeppelins never came within range. Don't take this the wrong way, but if you've got 12-inch guns firing shrapnel shells at you and you're in an airship, would you get into range of those things? Would you? Come on, you've announced it in the press. If I'm the German looking at it going, I must pilot my airship. 12-inch shrapnel shells. I will pilot them over there. There are better places to be. Preferably without something which is going to be aiming 305mm of fury at my behind. (1916) was fairly quiet. But the 6-inch guns that she'd finally had fitted then came in handy on the 8th of June when she, along with other ministers and destroyers, rebuffed an attempt by a dozen German ships to clear the nets and sweep the minefields of the Dover barrage. She also participated in the deception operation on the 8th of July when she, as well as the French 9.4-inch guns, fired blanks to cover the fire of the brand new 12-inch Dominion battery and that in turn, as it targeted the Tirpitz battery, which is one of the things which protected Ostend. The ship was also fitted with a dummy second funnel to make the Germans think that she was a new monitor. Unfortunately, the Germans weren't that deceived and actually did retaliate against French guns. And King Albert of Belgium came out to visit the monitor at that point. In 1917, the monitor was nearby. Lord Clive was nearby when a small group of German torpedo boats decided to bombard Dunkirk and attempted to engage them in the darkness, firing several rounds from our 6-inch guns with unfortunately little effect other than to scare some nearby people. Lord Clive was then intended to be used during the Great Landing, a plan to land troops between West End and Middelkerk to exploit the anticipated Allied gains made during the Battle of Passchendaele in July, and pocket German troops behind the landing and advancing troops. The landing and the advancing troops. The troops were to be landed via 3 2,500-ton pontoons, each of which could carry a brigade of infantry, an artillery battery, and 3 tanks. Each of the platoons was to be lashed in position between 2 monitors, and Lord Clive, together with Sir John Moore, was modified in March 1997 to handle one of them. Ships rehearsed until mid-July, but the Allies could not make the 10-mile advance necessary to launch the operation, and Field Marshal Haig refused to support Baker's proposal for a more modest landing in the Newport Middelkerk area in September, so the operation was cancelled. At this point, she goes away to get fitted with her 18-inch gun. And you can honestly say, and this is the nicest way, 6.5 knots? No, 2 of them in tandem with a pontoon that much. That's not going to be doing 6.5 knots. No. Yes, you'll land an infantry brigade. Yes, you'll land 3 tanks. Yes, you'll land an artillery battery. 3 of them, so you're going to be landing, what, a reinforced division? Ugh. Ah, well. On to General Crawford. Now, she also managed to spend most of her war with Dover Patrol. She did well with the Dover Patrol. And this picture really does illustrate how much they owe to the Majestic class battleships in the shaping of their main guns. Eventually, she actually managed to have her quick-firing 6-inch guns replaced with Mark 7 6-inch guns, which are longer ranged. And also, her 3-pounder gun was later replaced by a quick-firing 3-inch or 76mm 20 CWT anti-aircraft gun later in the war. Pretty cool. She's named for General Robert Crawford, commander of the Light Division during the early years of the Peninsular War, who was killed at Ciriga-Rego. But that's just not. Again, naming them for things which are built or killed. She is laid down as M7 on the 9th of January 1915, and Harland Wolff's berth number 3, along with her sister. Again, they are double teaming, building the monitors because they can. You have the space. You'll churn them out. In September 1915, she participates in the bombardment of Ostend, along with Lord Clive and another Prince Eugene. And she goes on to have a war which really does mirror her sister. They are pretty much everywhere together. In 1916, the uncluttered forecastle was considered the nice freeboard and free design of Lord Clive's allowed Bacon to use General Crawford to ferry 50-ton 12-inch Mark 10 barrels and 28-ton 9.2-inch barrels, Mark 10 barrels, to Dunkirk, France, to be used to bombard German coastal artillery. The barrels were loaded by crane onto trucks positioned on General Crawford's portside deck and then rolled off the deck via a thick wooden ramp onto the stone jetty in Dunkirk. First barrel apparently was difficult to unload, unsurprisingly, because it was thinner at the muzzle than at the breech and wanted to curve as it rolled. Subsequent barrels were encased in wood to make them easier to roll. General Crawford managed to deliver the first gun in April and the rest in July, and this is what sets up some of the shore batteries. She also does some experiments with Short's Type 184 float plane, and doesn't always go successfully to the plan. And on the night before the fifth Battle of Ypres, began on 27th, the monitors bombarded targets along the coast to simulate preparations for amphibious landing, and then switched to other targets at dawn. General Crawford and the other monitors were focusing on the Germans' lines of communication, firing slowly to keep up steady pressure, but also to make sure that the Germans had trouble moving stuff around. In 1919, she was offered for sale to the Kingdom of Romania, but they decided they didn't want her, and so she was scrapped in 1921. Sadly enough. Then it's on to the Earl of Peterborough, and if you notice, there is HMS Roberts of the Abercrombie class behind her in the corner, off to the left of your screen. She's named after Charles Mordaunt, 3rd Earl of Peterborough, British general in the War of the Spanish Succession, who fought in Spain. The 12-inch battery on Peterborough came from HMS Mars, pictured earlier. Now, she is one of the ones which actually goes to the Eastern Mediterranean, and in 1916 she sells Turkish positions in the Dardanelles. During the Iranian War, was active against Turkish units in Egypt, Palestine, and Turkey itself. She's a cool ship. And she provides a lot of firepower where it's needed. Right. And finally, for this part, Sir Thomas Picton, who's of course named for the British general of the Peninsular War, who was killed at the Battle of Waterloo, and one of Wellington's favourites. Her guns also came from Mars, and she again was dispatched to the Eastern Mediterranean. So both Mars guns ended up back in the Eastern Mediterranean. And she basically copies her sister, the Earl of Peterborough. They are blasting away in the Eastern Mediterranean with their 12-inch guns. Interestingly enough, and this is a point which I think should be made, in support of the Western Front, the monitors are incredibly concentrated. In that, as we'll be talking about in part 2, they are often, well, part 4, part 2 of this one on the Lord Clives, they are often operating as a large group, and you have them, especially with the later the 15-inch monitors and some of the smaller 9.2-inch monitors, they are operating as a large collective on the Dover Patrol. In Eastern Mediterranean, they're often operating as, how do I put it? A more dispersed force. And there is something interesting here. Because in the last video, I talked about the Battle of Imbros. And of course, you had two monitors there, one of which had 14-inch guns, one of which had far smaller 9.2s. So they couldn't really do much. If you'd had all the monitors together in the Eastern Mediterranean, if you'd had all four of the, well, let's say 2 or 3 of the 14 inches together, and both of the 12 inches, and all the 9.2s together as a group, as you had on the Dover Patrol. Yes, they'd have still been slow, but if that lot had been waiting in the bay for Battle of Imbros, then battleship or no battleship, there would have been a very interesting experience for a battlecruiser. Because it would have had to deal with a lot of ships which could potentially damage it, firing it from a lot of different angles, and it can't concentrate. It would either have to just break up its fire, in which case it's less likely to land a critical hit on any single one of them, or it concentrates its fire, in which case you have the same Dogger Bank effect, where it's going, I'm firing everything at you! But there are all of you who are not engaged at the moment and pelting away with me. Oh, cute. But they can never do that. Why? Because unlike the Western Front, which is, you've got the Dover Barrage, you've got the Grand Fleet, the High Seas Fleet, you've got all these things which allow for the concentration and require the concentration of forces. In the Eastern Mediterranean campaign of supporting the army, you've got to have these disparate forces because you've got the army fighting a far more a war of maneuver. They could need you here, they could need you there. Support can be all over the place. So they have to be more broken up. And this actually makes their security far more difficult to deal with. And actually, this is, you could argue, the weakness of the monitors versus the strength of monitors. Where they're able to be concentrated, yes, an individual monitor is no match for a battleship. But if you've got a dozen of them sailing along together, then a solo battleship is probably going to, or even a solo battlecruiser, is probably going to think, you know what, I have better things to do with my time, really, and I'm going to go that way and find out what they are. Which can lead to, and it does lead to some interesting discussions in the interwar period, in that people are saying Britain should possibly be building monitors again, and they should be doing, because they're better than battleships. The problems for monitors are the moment you start going, right then, I want to add speed. Okay, well, if I'm going to add power, I might as well add length to the hull, so I get that beam to length ratio down. Okay, if I got length up, I might as well add more guns on the back. So that they can fire that way or that way, and they can get a salvo going. We're adding on speed, adding on guns, and then you go, oh, how much speed am I getting here? How much guns? Keep burning up, you eventually end up the back of a battleship. Monitors are great for fire support for amphibious warfare in the interwar years, in World War I, and in World War II. You need their firepower. Want their firepower. They're designed to get in close, very heavy guns, and provide that fire support that an army needs from a navy. What they aren't, and in no way could ever be, on battleship replacement. They're just not. And there's nothing wrong with that. Okay? Not everything has to be a battleship to be useful in a war. In fact, here is the dirty little secret. As great as battleships are, and as great as aircraft carriers are, and as much as you need them, you don't often need as many of them as you need ships. So quite a lot of your ships are going to be not battleships, not aircraft carriers. This is why in the Napoleonic Wars, the most common hull types that you heard about were built weren't first rates, second rates, or even fourth rates. They were third rates and fifth rates. Fourth rates were heavy frigates at the end of it. Lovely, all those ships of the line, lovely. But they're a bit of an enforcer rather than fighter. Yes, first rate can outfight a second rate, and yes, the second rate can outfight a third rate. But a well-trained, well-crewed third rate can give a first rate or a second rate a very good run for its money, and you can probably afford to build a few more of them than you can first rates or second rates. It adds up in hull numbers, which means you can generate a larger force where you need it. Useful. It's the same with fifth rates. Because frigates, well, their jobs in the Age of Sail are convoy, protection of merchant ships, almost raiding themselves, i.e. taking out enemy merchant ships, and scouting, reconnaissance, fleet. Oh, and relaying signals in battles. So sitting back from the firing line, when the visual signals, flags go up on the admiral ship, hoisting them up themselves, so all the ships which can't see their flagship because of the smoke and the fire and the fury of the battle, see the frigate. Go, oh, those are the signals. Or, I can't see them. Carry on. There are options. Basically, if you do the latter one, you'd better be right and better come with a lot of glory. Otherwise, your career will be over. If you do it well, you're good. If you do it badly, no. 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 So, and in World War One, this is what the Royal Navy's needing. Yes, they are getting rid of their older battleships. Yes, they could use them. But honestly, they require a lot of crew and a lot of things to get going, and they could better redeploy those resources, i.e. those 12-inch guns, elsewhere. Those 12-inch guns are useful on monitors. You cannot get a Majestic class that close in shore. It will just run aground. Won't do anything. So, you redeploy the guns. You build a hull. Something you have the infrastructure in place to do. If you're lucky enough to have the infrastructure in place to build, and as we'll be getting into in the next class war, it does depend on some of your leadership involved. That will be all. Right. Coming up. Yeah, right, but that's definitely not the right one. Oh, I definitely uploaded the other one for March. Ah, well, March will be in the next video. Take care, and hope you've enjoyed this one, and, well, thank you for watching as ever. If you like, then please press like if you would like to subscribe, then subscribe, and if you'd like to see more. And if I don't know, you feel particularly generous, please consider becoming a patron or joining Discord for more chats. Patron is always good because that feeds my book habit, but that's entirely up to you. Thank you very much, and hope you enjoyed them. Take care. Long slide.